Check off the tasks and follow my strategies to keep the real estate transaction on track for closing. So I'm currently a real estate processing manager. The real estate transaction, or the deal, is assigned to me once there is an accepted offer and all contract paperwork has been executed. In the last 4 years, I have successfully managed 1,145 real estate transactions to closing. In the first video of this series, I gave you the 5 stages of managing a real estate transaction that have helped me and others get deals to the closing. In my last video, I covered the tasks and strategies for the processing begin stage. The takeaways were: organize your documents. Communication in writing is key. The earnest money deposit needs to be paid and receipted. And orders for items like buyer due diligence, inspections, title, etc. need to be placed per the purchase agreement. Today I'm breaking down stage 2, moving right along. This stage is jam-packed with my strategies to accomplish these tasks. Let's go! Overall, the theme of this stage is still going to be communication. In this stage, I call the updates momentous updates. More on that in a few. The tasks and strategies are going to be dependent on the client that we represent. To be clear, I'll break down both sides of each task and my strategy to avoid mistakes. In the last stage, inspections and buyer due diligence per the purchase agreement were ordered. If our client is the buyer, I would have ordered those inspections on behalf of the buyer. My first task when I represent the buyer is to follow up with the inspection companies to receive the inspection reports and any associated invoices due for those inspections. I need to save those reports and invoices in my pending deal folder and make sure that the buyer and our buyer's agent are in receipt of these in order to make a timely inspection response. My strategy to avoid missing an inspection response deadline is to make a calendar event for the buyer inspection due date per the timeline from the purchase agreement. I also add this to the buyer's agent calendar and set up my Google Calendar for email reminders to the buyer's agent 2 days and 1 day in advance of this due date. In my area, the buyer's agent reviews the inspection reports with the buyer. The buyer's agent writes the buyer's inspection response, and the buyer's agent is responsible to submit this on time to the listing agent. However, I always insist that the real estate agent, the buyer's agent in this case, provides copies of all of the paperwork to me as we go along. Again, I'll mention here that in your area of business, things could be handled differently. If our client is the seller, I still make a calendar event on my calendar and the listing agent's calendar on the date the buyer's inspection response is due per the PA. This way we are both on the lookout for the BIR from the buyer's agent. When the buyer's inspection response does come in, I want to make sure that the seller and our listing agent are in receipt of the buyer's inspection response. I save that paperwork in my Drive Pending Deal folder. I add the seller inspection response due date to the calendar in the same way. This time set up reminders for the listing agent 2 days and 1 day in advance of this due date. Adding events and reminders of an upcoming inspection response due date will help avoid missing an inspection response deadline. In case you didn't know, a missed response or an unanswered response means acceptance by default. I also speak to the listing agent after reviewing the BIR that was submitted to see if there are any quotes or estimates needed for repairs that the buyer is requesting. If so, I find out which repairs, if there are any preferred vendors for quotes, and get those ordered and scheduled as soon as possible. Upon receipt of those, I save them and then email them to the seller and to the listing agent. In my area, the listing agent writes up the SIR response and remits this to the buyer's agent. And this can go back and forth once, even twice, or more. I just continue to make the same calendar events and email reminders for the agent that represents our client. Once the inspection response is accepted by both sides, I review what has been agreed upon. If our side is the buyer and the buyer hasn't accepted any repair responsibility, then I just confirm with the listing agent that they are ordering the repairs. If we represent the seller and the seller agreed to repairs, I first talk with the listing agent to make sure I confirm what repairs I am ordering. Sometimes you'll have a seller that has a relationship or a connection with the repair vendor, and the seller wants to handle the repairs directly with them. Once I have confirmed repairs that I am ordering, I immediately start getting these scheduled. Important note here though, if there's any concern about the appraised value, and I have had instances where the seller will not authorize repairs until the appraisal is back. So be cautious here. You wouldn't want to have work completed with invoices due and then find out there's a value issue. This could jeopardize the entire deal, which can really be a huge pitfall. So before you order any repairs on behalf of the seller, make sure you have had a conversation with the listing agent. Upon the completion of all repairs, I follow up with each repair vendor for their completed work invoice. I save those in my Drive Pending folder inside a new folder that I label Closing Invoices. The invoice will either be marked paid because the seller paid the vendor directly, or this invoice will need to be paid by the seller at the time of closing. In any event, I collect all of these invoices, save these for our records, and I will remit these to the title company or escrow agent for payment. Avoid this huge faux pas. Make sure that you have collected all of the invoices for all of the completed repairs per the agreed inspection response. And make sure all outstanding invoices are collected at the time of closing or have been marked paid. There is nothing worse than missing an invoice for repairs and having to chase down the payments after a closing. Yes, we all make mistakes. This is not a fun one. Here's another bonus tip. I've seen many deals where a credit is agreed upon in lieu of repairs. In this situation, these credits need to be agreed upon in an amendment to the purchase agreement and signed by both the seller and the buyer. If the buyer is using a lender, their lender needs this amendment to allow the credit from the seller to the buyer on the closing statement. Most times this amendment would need to be reviewed by the lender's underwriter. So my best advice, remind your agent and the co-op agent if this is the situation. Submit this amendment earlier rather than later, which will help the buyer's lender stay on track. Although this doesn't sound like a long list of tasks, I found this stage can be quite time-consuming. And if you are like me, you probably have multiple deals in your pipeline in this stage all at the same time. Just be prepared knowing that an inspection response can go back and forth multiple times. And the biggest pitfall would be missing an inspection response deadline. Use my strategy of calendar events and reminders as your agent's safety net. By following the stages, tasks, and my strategy in this video series, hopefully you're feeling more confident. I hope by now you've grabbed my free ebook that is below the video description. And soon I'll be offering some templates and forms that I use in my process, so stay tuned to my channel. In the meantime, I'm emailing the buyer's lender for any update on the appraisal status. Questions I'm asking: has the appraisal been ordered? Has the appraisal been scheduled? When is the appraisal due back to your office? And then finally, did the property appraise at value, and are there any conditions? If our side is the seller side, occasionally I've had a lender that only releases this information to their borrower. In this instance, then a simple email to the buyer's agent for an update is also appropriate. But I found in most cases, especially when you've introduced yourself in the beginning, a lender will keep you in the loop. And then the communication expectations. I mentioned this in the last video, and in cooperation with the momentous updates. With the momentous updates I mentioned earlier, these fall under my communication is key mantra. Here are some examples of momentous updates. And these depend on which side I represent. The earnest money has been received. Inspection reports are in. Inspection responses are due. Quotes or repair appointments are scheduled. Appraisal appointments have been made. Appraisal results are in. These are just examples of some of the momentous updates that our client and our agent want and need to know about. And if there are any immediate problems, call your agent right away. I provide these updates to our client and our agent as they happen. Remember, I'm doing this communication in writing and always including our agent in this communication. I never, ever go 1 week, Monday through Friday, without some type of update to our client and to the cooperating broker. One of my best work strategies is to update each file and each contact in the file every Friday. Why? The weekend comes, questions arise, clients wonder, some clients worry. You can eliminate all of this by communicating at the end of the work week, even if all you have to say is all is well. So I've moved right along through this stage, and I'm on to the next stage, almost to the finish line. This is where we'll put the pieces in place as everything comes together. And in this stage, we'll be able to schedule the closing. This happens in the next daily video in this series.